You what? Oh.
I love your suit.
It's in honor of my mother. This is my mother.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
And to everybody, this is Dr. Talia, this is Tony Steele. And Tony is at Jacqueline Harris doing the village. And I
Doing
want
what?
everybody to know the village.
Okay.
She started
Oh,
the village and she's
we
there
talked about
tutoring
that.
our children. So, and she started the village and just housed at
So
our
what's the
school.
village?
Yes, sir.
People who come together to minister to these little ones who have been gone down so
Oh,
bad.
okay, so
We're trying
do we
take
need
them
to,
back
we can move, so this is the main view right here?
over. Yeah,
That's from this camera. So
That's what Tony is.
yeah.
So do we need to tighten it up?
tighten it up.
Okay.
So I'm gonna run through the Thank you.
It seems like I've seen you peak your peak. We've been at certain things together, but we never really gotten a chance to, because it seems like you know about African history, a lot about it.
I've been doing it since 2004 with my kids at Pensacola State College, but I just retired in October. So now I'm building the village that I had there. And in 2015, I made up my mind when I was working at the college. I did 33 plus some years. So right there at the college with the African American Students Association, the Black History and Culture Committee, right? So in 2015, I'm like writing these things down I'm going to do. And one of them was to start a school, which I registered to start Chosen Heritage of Excellence in August of this year in this county.
Oh, wow.
Yep, man. And so, yeah,
So you're really not retired?
I didn't claim it to. I just retired from Pensacola.
Right. Right.
That was lovely.
Gotcha, gotcha.
But yeah, you connect whatever you want. I'm getting my card, okay?
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
All right.
All right, we're 10 minutes out, 10 minutes out. I'm good. I don't know if I got a chance to hug you the other day, or night, or whenever. I know I looked your way.
Yeah.
You got something to eat?
I'm good right
Okay.
now.
When people come in, just tell them that we're live and silence it.
I did not tell any of these in PowerPoint.
Tell them we're live. You so crazy. Tell them we're live, silence, and everything else.
I'm out talking with them, hanging with them and stuff like that. Imagine y'all gonna announce a little something before you go live or something.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah, so we're gonna do that here in just a second.
Oh, I never got. Was that tea or juice? Tea. It was tea. Okay. So, Robin, what's this? It was good.
She said something banana pudding. Which one?
The
Banana. What you call this stuff? Bread pudding. Huh?
So y'all need some greeting men and greeting people. Mm-hmm. Well, you busy and
Listen.
shrimp and stuff out there already. Hey, how you doing? You pretty busy, ain't you?
You ain't got no problem. I usually don't eat before, but you know you and your pasta salad.
Right. You sure don't.
And all I did was sniff the chicken because I knew if I started, it's over with. But I ain't got nothing on the program for tomorrow. Nothing on my schedule. It's my first day off.
For real? So you ain't gonna get up and come out? When you get
I ain't getting up before 9 a.m. I tell them if they don't eat, they gonna eat it before, they gonna eat it after. All right, we're live in 6 minutes, 6 minutes. We're live in 6 minutes. Please silence your phone, all your devices and all of that. Only if Jesus called. And then we need to call 911 if Jesus called. That's right. Get your food. The audience will not be on the camera. We'll just be on the camera here. The audience will not be on the camera, but we have to have you seated and ready to go. That's Reverend Jordan. Yeah, that's got to be out the shot, so you got to.
Yeah, where's my purse?
I don't know. You want to put it over here on the table?
Yeah. Hold on, I have I brought a tote bag, and that.
I don't know, but you got.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm trying to hurry up and.
5 minutes. That's a long time in TV time.
Hello, how are you? No, I'm looking for my tote bag.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for
Thank you. I like your hair too.
No, not my purse. It's black. Yeah, right there.
You met Miss
Right there.
Celestine
Thank you.
Lewis. Did you meet Jewel Canada Wynn? I did. Okay, good. Okay. It just worked out this way. All our front row seat experts. She said, don't say expert. All y'all front row seat experts are women. That's all I'm saying. We need to get a picture. You ready? Tiniana, they putting lipstick on. Rachel, can you take a picture of us real quick? Come on, y'all. We're going to take a picture. We're going to take a picture real quick. Let Tiniana get some lipstick on there. I'm glad I looked. I didn't have my phone off talking about everybody else.
All right, yeah, let me turn mine off.
Okay. Come on, y'all. We'll come right here in front, right here. Put Miss Celestine in the front there. We got one more.
All right.
You're here?
Yeah.
Cheese. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you said mute our phones.
Mute your phones. Yep. I'm glad I checked. We're 4 minutes out.
Okay, let me see.
Okay,
Where
yeah,
we
4
start?
minutes out.
Where do we start?
So who came off the ship? The sister?
Gilmar.
We'll start there about the, so I'll come in choosing politics or economics or public service. And so that's where we started with Gilmar. I'll let you start with that conversation. Yes. Oh, I'm finna play some Gotcha TV now. I will not do that. No. I will say that y'all are here, but the only one that will pull up. Can I have you? Let me have you switch. Jewel, can you sit right here with Pastor Jordan? Can y'all switch? Yes. Because the only one I will probably come to is Jewel. Yeah. That way she's in my line of sight, and then time.
Take these bracelets
Did we say we were talking? So I'm going to bring up.
Can't show my business.
And we're only looking at the camera. I'll look at them quickly, but I'll. Good evening and welcome to a special broadcast for WBQ on WBQP TV. We are live at the Kakua Institute, and this is a special program called Revisiting Pensacola's Black History. It's a continuation of a radio program started with the vision of Miss Celestine Lewis, who you will see and meet later in the program. Her vision is to ensure that we never forget the history of not only Pensacola, but those who have widely contributed to the history of Pensacola, primarily and predominantly African Americans. And so as we celebrate Black History Month, we wanted to have this conversation. We'll do this in 3 parts. We'll talk politics and business, we'll talk the role of church in early education, and then our final segment will be revisiting integration and the impact that integration has had on the Black community, the African American community, Negroes in Pensacola. We'll do all of that. I am Robin Richard with the Kakua Institute, and I'm happy to be joined by Tiniade Broughton, who's the co-founder of the John Sunday Society. You'll meet Ms. Celestine Lewis later, and also we have 3 front row experts. Former City Councilwoman Jewel Canada Wynn, who was also Pensacola's Mayor Pro Tem. We're also joined by, you'll hear about it in the second segment, but the current pastor of St. Paul United Methodist Church, Reverend Carlia Jordan, and one of the longtime members of the church, Miss Carla Jones. And that church was involved, as you'll hear in the second segment, with the role of church and education with the Pensacola Normal School. So welcome. We're excited for the vision of Ms. Celestine Lewis. We're excited that Jacqueline Harris Preparatory Academy is sponsoring this program, and we're excited that we are live on WBQP TV channel 12 and 12.8. And so we hope that you enjoy the show, and we're going to get started. So welcome, Tiniade. Excited to be and have this conversation. And as I said, this is that continuing conversation that we had on the radio on WRNE 980. For the past few weeks, we have been having this conversation, except for the integration conversation.
Right.
So let's look at the first segment that we're going to talk about is something that you have talked about well as an archivist and a historian, is that role of politics in business, and in fact how you have to sometimes choose when people are entering politics, how you have to choose between either making money or making this political difference.
Right. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Jambo, Alafiani, all those greetings, Kiambote, in whatever language you prefer. But good evening. Thank you for having me, Robin. So if we were to start with politics and the situation of African American personhood in an attempt to protect, well, first of all, it's a thankless job, I would say that. But it is also a part where you really have to love your community and you have to want better for your community. But counter and balanced with the fact that, it doesn't always pay the best. That's fine, that's what it is. I think now we even get paid more than people in the past, but you still have to be able to focus on what you're doing and make sure that you do whatever you can to make sure your constituents needs are met. And I think that's something we see throughout history. I think we're in a convenient place to where we don't have some of the concerns people of generations had before, because they had to, and what we talked about with Polkinghorne and running for city council, the first people who ran for city council after Reconstruction, they had to sometimes compromise themselves to their work, everyday work, and sometimes they had to give it up because of their working. So I would be interested in going more into that and talking about what they had to do and how we benefit from the past and that we don't have to do that anymore.
And let's go back to that early, so primarily we're going to be talking about post-Civil War and Reconstruction and coming forward in this about 90 to 100 years. We're going to pack a lot into these next few minutes.
Okay.
But I want to go back because you brought up the point about one of the early people who came here, perhaps enslaved, and more than likely enslaved, and that she took agency through the political system. So this is not someone who was running for political office, but in fact, so I want you to talk about her. So in fact, she took political agency, a public service. She took the public service route to get her agency back with those early people coming here to settle in Pensacola, into Florida.
Our first woman here that came with the DeLuna settlement, Guiomar, and we have her bill of sale, so we definitely know she was enslaved. As a city, we give credit to DeLuna, but we never talk about the people behind the scenes or the people who we did not know until now, and one of them was Guiomar, an enslaved woman from Nigeria who was a part of the DeLuna expedition. Because she was property, it shows how from the very beginning, Africans are a part of commerce. We're part of the condition that allowed capitalism, part of the condition that allowed us to grow as a society off the backs of these enslaved people. And very often we can look back until today and see where that originated from the free labor of persons and how it just translated over the years. We could talk about that later, but it translated over the years to where we are today.
And so what did Guiomar do in terms of getting her agency?
She was on the ship, and she was actually accompanying DeLuna. And in some ways, we definitely can tell in what ways, but she did what she had to do to make sure she was able to find herself in that situation. And there's a book coming out, she's coming out, she's going to be a part of our book. So I'll let him be able to break that news, but when you get the book, you can tell more about her story. And
that's the series that we did as part of the Gannett Pensacola News Journal, Writing the Past series. On the
it'll delve into who Guiomar was and what she did and how she found her agency. Right.
And so from there you see 1559, and so now we're going to fast forward 3 centuries, a lot, because we don't know of all, because a lot of the documents that early Pensacola saw were destroyed or were lost to storms, and so we don't have a lot, even though we know that they were here, we don't have a lot of evidence, physical evidence. But we do see post-Civil War, during that Reconstruction period, where African Americans were taking their agency back and really being involved in the government process.
Right, so we do, after Reconstruction, we have a lot of African American participation in government. And in fact, we recently did an exhibit detailing who some of those people were. John Sunday was one, Johnny Gibson was on city council. There's a school named after him as a result. There are tons of people in this community at the time, because remember, at the time this was a majority African American city. And of course, in response to that, you had people intentionally trying to shrink those numbers so you could shrink that, so you could could control that population.
And that's because in large part, a lot of, during the Civil War, the government fled, went to, was it Montgomery or Enterprise or some
Somewhere in
part of
Alabama,
Alabama? Yeah. And so then that you had all these citizens, newly freed citizens. Of course, there was a
Well,
population
actually, before that, when you have the free people of color here. So the interesting thing following Guillemar's story, even maybe 200 years, 300 years after, there was a condition where you had what became free women of color, but that happened because you had these enslaved women and the Spanish settlers. I'm sorry, the Spanish settlers and the Spanish men who would have babies with these women. And in their skill, force, sometimes it just depends on what the situation was, they negotiated the children's freedom. And Pensacola had a large free black population here.
and used the system as we saw with, is it
and that goes back to that agency.
Yeah, the Euphrosyne Heinert, one of those early women who was termed a person of color. We don't have a picture of her, but is termed a person of color, where she used the court system, that political system, in fact, appealed to Andrew Jackson as, what was he, whatever his territorial title was, governor, and so appealed to him so that then he could, so that she could get her, claim her stake in her property.
Right, she
so
won.
really using
She won.
that, yeah.
Right, so these people who, even though they were not full citizens, did what they could to participate in the political process. And we see that we have to work in the memory of that.
And so with the thing that kind of interests me is that with Reconstruction, you saw, as you said, we had the, John Sunday, Zebulon Elijah, you had, as you said, John A. Gibson, and so many others. And I definitely want you to talk about Salvador Pons, the first and only known African-American mayor of Pensacola. So you really saw this growth during this Reconstruction period.
Right, so think about it like this. You had all of these enslaved people, some free people of color, but now everyone is free. But remember, Pensacola was a place where it was skilled labor. We don't have plantations here. We have beach, right? But we don't have plantations in downtown Pensacola.
The sort of norm, and in the county, not the sort of normal, I'm using air quotes. Yeah,
and so with it, the enslaved population was they were brick makers, it was skilled labor, ironwork, things like that, to where after the Civil War, when the town is devastated, when the South is devastated, you have men who are now saying, I'm going to name my price, who are going to do the same kind of work that they were doing in slavery.
So now they are not necessarily a product themselves.
Right.
They're not property themselves. They're using that skill to now sell their product or service. A skill that either they gained or knew.
Right.
And I know there's some controversy, especially in the state of Florida.
Very new.
Yeah, about that, but that they gained or knew. But now they're turning that into an economic benefit.
Right.
Yeah.
Now they're naming their price in this war-torn South, and particularly in this part of Florida, and this part where you have, where it's necessary, where you have urban slavery, similar to what was happening in New Orleans and Charleston, urban slavery, where they're making things. Now they can name their price in ways that people perhaps in the country could not. And
then we see, so Reconstruction is most known from, say, 1866 until 1872, kind of the funding, but then so it's counted as this kind of decade period. But then you see Florida enact its 1885 Constitution. So all of the gains that were made during the 1868 Constitution are literally wiped away. So there's this whole reversal of the Reconstruction period, this effort to rebuild not only the United States, but the people in this very humane way. And so then you see the representatives who are supposed to represent the people really tear down what is thought to tear down all of those gains.
Pensacola played a major role in that.
Pensacola played a huge role in that.
E.A. Perry, whose house is right up the street, the E.A. Perry mansion. He was the governor of Florida for a while after Reconstruction. You have institutions being established, and I guess we'll get into churches later, but the politics that the churches worked through. Remember, they were not full in their citizenship yet. Even though you had 13th, 14th Amendment being passed, they were still experimenting with black folks being citizens.
So you had it legally, you had it on paper, but then the de facto.
Right, they kicked everybody out of government, right? So that showed you right there, it's totally not full citizenship. But the founding of some of our churches, the churches moving from the hush harbor to actual churches. My church, Allen Chapel, came as a result of what was formerly a secret organization, and then after the Civil War, they came out. They came out and established. And here in Pensacola, the church is still around. You have other churches too. What was the Baptist church? Help me remember.
Considered the oldest historic St. John Divine.
That's right.
Yeah, historic John the Baptist.
Historic John the Baptist.
I know it's a John in there.
Yeah,
Historic John the Baptist. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
this is how these freedmen are able to negotiate their own freedom and what they're going to do as a community, working under the guise, not guys, but just working under churches. And they established their own schools, their own community. Another organization that played a large role in that was Freemasons, the Freemason chapters, or the Black Freemasons, the Prince Hall Freemasons, were de facto government in a lot of ways, really. So these people are not recognized by the formal government. So in a lot of ways, they were managing things for the African American community under these organizations.
So you alluded to these hush harbors of black folks, predominantly black folks meeting in these secret places in the forest or in these wooded areas, and now they're able to come out because of Reconstruction. And but now the 1885 sort of looks like you have to go back, but there's really this pushback in terms of, and that's what you're saying with the Freemasons. But then we also see organizations like the Afro-American Businessmen's League, a man that we both adored, Daniel Cunningham, and you mentioned John Sunday. We had the first, what we think was the first black bank, or one of the early black banks, until we discover another one, the People's Cooperative Building and Loan Association, that banded together, that came together and made these decisions when they weren't able to be involved in these very public banks and things like that in the political sphere. They made the decision. And then, of course, during the 1900, Booker T. Washington stood up, and we had two people from Pensacola stand up, the National Negro Business League, and we had the Pensacola chapter of that as well.
Right, my beloved John Sunday.
Your beloved John Sunday.
Was a member of that.
DJ Cunningham, yeah.
And also the Union Mercantile.
The Union Mercantile, the real estate organization.
Right, which I really respect, of course, because my third great grandfather was a member of that, and he and a bunch of freedmen established this Union Mercantile Real Estate Association to basically own property. And you see in the records, they are buying up land, buying up lots under what is now Hollis T. Williams. And the Allen Chapel Church was a part of that.
Okay.
Right on the side of it. And just land throughout. And they would sell and they would barter in ways that black folks could not.
So even though they were not in what we consider today public service, elected positions, they were still being involved in this public good and trying to navigate.
Right, and they had to, because that was their only choice.
Yeah. There was a group, and I don't think that we mentioned this earlier. There was a group called the Pensacola Invincible 20, a group of, we know at least they were there in the 1920s through the 1950s, African American men who really sought to quietly influence politics. We see Dr. Horace Good actually sue the Democratic Party so that in 1928, so that he could vote, and so
right.
So
tell me more about this idea of your citizenship being defined by being able to sue.
So it is, because now you are taking part, in my thinking, that you are now taking part in the fullness of the Constitution, of the Declaration of Independence. So you're declaring yourself free from one tyranny, but then it's like the victory at home, victory abroad. You're now finding yourself fighting within the system that you were fighting that's saying you can give full equality for. So that by suing them, you are saying, I'm using the American legal system to ensure, just as they did with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, that my rights are fully recognized. And so
Right.
Dr. Good, it made national news. Dr. Good sued because he said, I have this right to vote, and so then you're not providing me with the right to do that. So I think he just, again, we're talking agency. And so I want to wrap this segment up and with two things. One, the first one is this incredible story that we keep hearing about, we keep talking about with Nick Williams and Dr. James Polkinghorne, and how they had to, what we think were maybe forced to make a decision, really what this whole segment is about, forced to make a decision to not run for political office because their money was going to get funny, as they say.
Right.
That their money was
Both
going to be
businessmen at
challenged.
the time, Nick Williams was a builder, and Dr. Polkinghorne was a pharmacist. And so we see that they're both going to run for city council. They're both members of the same church, Allen Chapel and me. But I'm wondering if even to run at the same time was intentional now. I'm wondering. Because they knew each other, they clearly knew that they would be competing. I wonder, it just makes me wonder, did they intentionally do that?
Well, they were running. I thought they were running in different, what was then called wards. I thought
Oh,
they
it was
were
different wards?
running in
Okay.
different
Okay.
wards.
They weren't
but
running against each other.
they
Okay.
weren't running against each other. But I don't believe. But then they ended up resigning their campaign at the same time, which is
Okay.
highly suspicious in this time. And this is in the 1950s. So here again, you've made 70, 80 years, you've had 70, 80 years since the Reconstruction period, and you would think that, all of the legislation is being fought in order to make everyone inclusive. But yet we see Dr. Good in 1928, and then 20 years later, we see Dr. Polkinghorne, Dr. James Polkinghorne, and Nick Williams try to get into that system, and then it's for naught.
But I think it's a part of this continuation of agency. So remember there was the streetcar boycott?
1905.
And at the time, those people knew they didn't have many rights, but they were just trying in whatever ways they could to affirm that they were here and that they mattered. So Pensacola partnered with Jacksonville, and another city, was it St. Augustine? I don't want to say it wrong, in Central Florida.
Definitely Jacksonville.
Yeah, definitely Jacksonville, though, and sent some of our Pensacola attorneys to Jacksonville. Jacksonville sent some of its attorneys to Pensacola, and they challenged the bus system, public transportation. Now, mind you, this was long before Rosa Parks. And in the beginning, they won. For all intents and purposes, they won. It was decided that the black women who often had their charges, little white children, could ride the buses. The city enacted an ordinance that allowed that.
That had failed at the state level.
Right.
And so it failed at the state level, then the city, led by the Chamber of Commerce, said, we want to do it locally.
Right,
We want to have the
right.
segregation locally.
Right, so that's how they attempted and succeeded, even though that was partially the intention of being able to sit where you want and desegregation. But the fact that that happened here in Pensacola, 50 years before Rosa Parks, says a lot about the way we interpreted our progress. It says a lot about this freedom story and how it was always in the minds and in the hearts of the community as they went about their days.
And so then we fast forward, we're going to close this segment with this, talking to former city councilwoman and longtime educator Jewel Canada Wynn, and we'll pull her up in the last few segments. But it was, she mentioned, and I thought it was really important, that it was not only the politicians who may have been challenged. Either choose one or the other, either choose making money or your job, as Dr. Polkinghorne and Nick Williams were challenged with. But it's also people who are working day to day who may want to get involved in the political process, and then who are challenged or with the money. So who are saying either if you do this, then you're not going to be able to succeed on the job, or you may not even have a job.
Right, and it's interesting how we were always able to be controlled through economics. And I think that's a point to be mentioned, because as things are happening now, what we see now, what are we going to do to economically advance? Because I tell you what, when you have your own money, you can tell people where to go and where you're going to go and what they can do and what you can't. You know, you have a different negotiation power when you have the power of the purse.
But in this case, we see this huge political economy, so that
Right.
people are being then either manipulated or controlled by the thought of, or the fear of, that the public service, the politics will mess with their money.
Right, mess with their money. That's really what it's
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
So, more so, and we know color in a lot of ways is secondary to that, because I hear stories all the time of certain folks in the tan yard who were able to pass, could almost escape their blackness outside of their neighborhood and pass as white and go downtown and shop different places in ways that most African American people could not.
If you were darker skinned, so
Right.
the people in the tan yard, this historic neighborhood, traditionally
right.
a lighter skinned black person.
Remember those original Pensacolians?
Okay.
Those original ones, right. So because they had the abilities to negotiate race in ways that other black people here couldn't, they took advantage of that. So we know that in negotiation of race, the scale of race slides, but the green money does not.
Yeah. That's a good thing to end. The scale slides, but the green money does not. If you're just joining us, we're live on WBQP TV with our special program called Revisiting Pensacola's Black History, sponsored by the Jacqueline Harris Preparatory Academy. And so with me, Tiniane Broughton, I'm Robin Richard. We are doing this in 3 parts, and so that we are looking at these hundreds of years of history, or re-looking at these hundreds of years of history through these 3 distinct segments. And so we're going to transition now from politics and business to the role of the church, the early church, in education. So before and after, we were talking that about how people literally came out of the bushes with the hush arbors and things like that. But during the early part of Pensacola, even during the enslavement period, we still see the education being important.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And the role that the schools, originally,
Your
I'm
microphone.
sorry, the role that the schools played in providing education, which is interesting to me because these folks, like in the flyer that we use, you see this old woman herself learning how to read.
Yeah.
So it was 2 things that the people of that period did. One was, after slavery, find their families, then get educated, right? And in forming their societies, their form of society, education was important. I know we have some educators here who might be able to talk more about that, but the role that education and religion played and still can play today.
And I think as education, now we talk about people being, what's the word we use if they're, they're not literate. And so I think, and, we're saying that, during that, there was not this idea of public education, so that education really was taken into the one-room schoolhouse, which was the church on Sunday or Wednesday night or whatever your Sabbath was, and then it was the school during the rest of those times, or the back of somebody's building, office building or something like that. But this idea of literacy, we've equated literacy with knowledge. And so which are 2, ended up conflating the 2. So I think that if someone is, as you said, and Leonard Pitts talks about these black men going back south, going deeper into the south to find their families, then how they had to not only navigate by the stars, this astrological way, but they had to read signs. They literally had to read signs. So how did they then learn that education?
Right, but remember, the schools taught more than that. It was, you know, you would learn how to build, like Booker T. Washington, you learn how to make the brick, then build the house with the brick. Sometimes you had the skills.
The
Sometimes you
industrial
did-
education.
Right, industrial education is along with the normal education. So they did what they could to become a full person.
And the first one that we see, one of the early schools, I have to be
Or
careful.
to replenish the full person. They were already fully people,
Yeah.
but just to feed the full person.
The one of the early ones we see is St. Joseph Catholic School.
Right, right.
And
Creole school.
I'm still shocked. St. Joseph Creole School. So that color dividing line that you talked about, that there was still, we had this sort of racial divide going on as well.
Even at the hospital, the one on 12th Avenue, it was divided black and white, but the black side was divided by Creole and black. The phone books were divided Creole and black.
So you're talking about what would then become Sacred Heart in
Right.
1914 or so? Yeah.
Right. So it was similar to the colored people of South Africa. You know, we always find ways to segregate ourselves.
Yeah. So I just lost my train of thought there. So these early schools we see St. Joseph School, the Catholic school, being segregated from the white Catholics, and so then, but we have this interracial segregation going on as well. What they thought at the time was the best way to educate children.
I still don't get it.
I
but
don't
okay.
get it either, but that's what they thought at the time. That's why we're here now. But then you see. So then you see, that's 1882. And so then you have the 1885 Constitution. And one of the other things that it does is really broadens this idea of public school, but still says you have to be segregated.
Right, the
within
Rosenwald
that.
School, the Rosenwald schools.
The Julius Rosenwald schools later. Yeah. And so, so you have.
And the Carnegie libraries.
And the Carnegie, so those are early 20th century. So in the late 19th centuries, you have again these business people who are in the churches standing up schools. And so again, I mentioned earlier, two of our front row people here represent one of those early schools, the Pensacola Normal School, which was led by Reverend G.W. Lewis, who was pastor of St. Paul United Methodist Church. So we see him standing up this school because they wanted to make sure that you had this education. And the house, we think, still stands right behind their second church on Rue Street there. So it still stands there. Yeah, but they would have these, they had school, and then they would have these celebrations, but they were really community celebrations of people graduating before they went on to either Tuskegee or a Florida A&M college or another school of higher education. Yeah. And then at the same time, we had Lily James School. So right around that same time, then you see Lily James School. Why was the Lily James School stood up?
I think it was important because she knew that public schools would not educate her. You remember she had 17 children over time. They all didn't make it. They all didn't survive. But there was always a baby who needed to be taught. And she established a school to make sure that her children would be educated. Now, in time, the oldest children taught the youngest children, and all of them attended college. Wow. And they all became very successful. The one that we know is, of course, Daniel James. I wouldn't even say Chappie because I think Chappie got his nickname from his older brother.
Okay.
So he's the second Chappie. But
what people know now, General Daniel Chappie James, yeah.
Right, so she knew the importance of education, and she knew what to do when the government would not appropriately educate your children. And so she opened the doors to all who could. It cost a nickel, right? And she opened the doors to anyone who wanted to come. I think we can learn from that, especially now. So in memory
The
of her.
idea of, so she wasn't, to be clear, she wasn't a church school. It wasn't a church affiliated school.
Right.
But very well known are her commandments, and especially that 11th commandment. So she had
Thou
the
shalt
list of
not
the
quit.
10, yeah, she had a list of the 10 commandments, the Christian 10 commandments predominantly listed, and I understand that you may even had to recite them as a child.
Right, and also the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. That's in the museum as a song they had to learn. But remember, her son, who became a principal in Jacksonville, which is where Rosamond Johnson and his brother both live in Jacksonville. So it would make sense that they learned it, brought it back to their mother, and she taught it to the children.
And they were, so she used these Christian principles to guide the education
Definitely.
in her schools. Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah. And I want to go back because we're talking about, and I know we're working on a project together where this may come to fruition, where we may actually see a replication. I'm hoping a replication of the school, but the Escambia High School, which still shocks a lot of people every time.
The first one.
The first one in 1899, where you had people from the community say, because of this landscaper, this gardener, who wanted to, his daughter wanted to go to, he was a widower, and his daughter wanted to go to a higher school, higher grades, and wanted to go to high school.
I'm sorry, I have a question for you. Did schools stop at a certain grade for Black children?
School stopped, for all that we know, of all children at the 8th grade until those high schools. So high schools, as we think about today, my understanding, they may have just been either 8th or 9th grade. They were not the high school today.
Okay.
So then they would go to these institutes, which would encompass that high school, because you may graduate from one institute. So they had different levels. That's my understanding of it, yeah. And so together, along with these businessmen and women and teachers, come together and stand this school up. They bought this property, a whole block. So if you know where Navistas was, East Hill Church of God in Christ, right there, that entrance. I tell people, and we see schools even today that either may have a religious affiliation, a sort of secular school, not a public school per se. It may be a secular school or a parochial school today, but we have one in Jacqueline Harris Preparatory School, so it's not a religious school, but as you'll hear Miss Celestine Lewis always say, enter to worship and depart to serve. So they take these religious principles and use them to teach the children, whosoever come. But you talked about some other ones that are here as well today.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't necessarily.
Deliverance Tabernacle.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Just yes, all those schools,
SL
those
Jones,
church ran schools, right?
Yeah, that are tied into religious schools. So again, if you're just joining us, we are live at the Kukua Institute with this amazing project sponsored by Jacqueline Harris Preparatory Academy. Tiniade Broughton, and I'm Robin Richard, and we're live on WBQP 12 and 12.18 and on all your social media dials. So welcome. We're so excited to have you. And with the live studio audience, we won't have them yell out, but trust me, they're live. They're live. So we're so excited. Our last segment that we're going to talk about is revisiting integration. And I appreciate I appreciate when we were talking last week, you mentioned at the end of the session.
Segregated. Zordell Hurston was not supportive of integrating schools. She wrote, I think what that generation did not consider was what happens to the Black-owned businesses. And remember, we talked about the importance of economics. So what happens when you can now go to the mall or go to this store that's been desegregated or go downtown? What happens to the stores in the Black community?
And to be sure, legally you could go anywhere.
Right.
I mean, on paper.
But
But socially and culturally, you would have had to wait until a white person has been served, a white person was not in the store, a particular day. You talked about the hospital. I heard interviewed many women who said, "Oh, I know when such and such had their baby, it was on a Wednesday because that's when Sacred Heart or the Pensacola Hospital would allow black women to come in and have their babies." Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So on paper, yeah, you could do that. Yeah.
Right. So what happens in this now to black-owned businesses in this now desegregated South? And I think we are now learning the ramifications of that.
So we talked about the Afro-American Business League back in the 1890s, and then the National Negro Business League. And the first meeting was in Boston in August of 1900, and two people, Daniel Cunningham being one and Matthew Louis being the other, at least those two appeared there with hundreds of African Americans. And both of them, in fact, spoke, and their speeches are recorded in the books in archives all over the world, housed at Tuskegee. But Daniel Cunningham said something really interesting. He said that essentially we have this thing, at least we used to say in the country, that you think the white man's ice is colder.
Right, I heard that before.
Yeah. And so he essentially says that same thing. He says that I don't want you to shop here because my ice is essentially, I'm rephrasing, my ice is the same as a white man's ice. I want you to shop here because I give you good business and I give you quality regardless of your color. So that he's really appealing to the every man and the every woman to shop because he's providing a good service.
Right, and that's important. What stands out to me though, I remember hearing stories of my oldest great aunt who was born in maybe 1916 or somewhere around there, and she would talk about how there was this need. She questioned why her nieces and nephews wanted to go shop downtown and why they wanted to leave the community, because they had everything that they needed in Belmont de Villiers. And that's where they lived. They had grocery stores, they had clothing stores. They didn't have to leave for anything, and they didn't have to go be harassed by people who did not want them.
Even though they were paying the same price, the money was green, and they were getting hopefully the same product or service for their money.
Right, and the saying was, what are you doing that for? You're supposed to, why are you going to eat there? You're supposed to eat before you leave home. So if I think about what that really means, to eat before you leave home. What do you need to do to eat before you leave home? First of all, you need the grocery stores.
Yeah.
You need things, you need to know how to set a table at home. You need your community to gather, so you eat before you leave home. And I think our problem or our difficulties now is that we're not eating before we leave home.
Meaning you're not, the charity begins at home and then spread abroad. So even with the eating in the same restaurant that could provide you with the same service.
It seems like it's a sort of metaphor too, though. You know, and of course this was mother wit that she was giving. But, and they would just laugh it off, chuckle, and, go downtown. But there's power in those words. Eat before you leave home. Nobody's going to disrespect you if you eat before you leave home. And I think because of the political climate of today, we're going to see more of that, and we're going to need that wisdom, that mother wit, to know to eat before you leave home.
And this wasn't the first, so we talked about we've covered a lot. And we talked about the streetcar segregation. So then, and I think about then in 1905, but how that must have been stood up in 1955 with Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, when you're not taking you're not providing your dollars to this public transportation, but then in fact you're providing it to African American transportation companies.
Right, remember
to do the same thing, to do the same service.
Remember in that boycott, they had the funeral homes were using cars to take people where they needed to go. Bimbo was one. I can definitely say Bimbo was one. I can't say for sure the other ones were, but I would guess that they were. But they were driving people to where they needed to go, so that they could get around while the bus boycott, could continue.
So let me. It's not a funny story, but it did make me chuckle during the time that he was telling me. The late Dan Bimbo, who was the nephew or the grandchild, well, one of the descendants of the original owner, Bimbo. And so he said that when that happened with the boycotts, that the bankers came to his uncle and said, we loaned you money to transport dead people, not live people. And so it was this veiled threat of back to that economic, this sort of economic threat that you are, you're fighting for your rights and the rights of everybody, and yet here is this threat to your bottom line, to your dollar. And he said these were the bankers that came to them and said, didn't say stop, didn't say watch out, but just say this is what we did, and so we can call that loan at any time. So this opportunity where you're fighting. So here, Bimbo had been in business since 1937, Joe Morris since 1910, and so many other funeral homes. So here's his business, and yet you're being threatened because you're fighting for inclusion. Yeah.
That goes back to what you originally said about Nick Williams and Polkinghorne, about their business or running for office. So what happens when these groups of people can use their power? Because all it is now is power.
Yeah.
It's a negotiation of power. So in what ways does one group's power or one person's power get challenge another, and what happens after that dance?
So we've got just a few minutes left, and we hadn't even talked about the Brown versus Board. We hadn't talked about the local case to the Augustus case.
Well, you talk about hurry up.
Okay. So I mean, because especially when we talk about integration, then it's not our modern period of integration that we're talking about. Is the 1950s and 60s, and probably some here in the audience can even talk about how they helped to integrate schools. But I do then wonder if there is what I hear in talking to the elders in the community for whatever piece of writing, that when I inevitably say, what do you think happened to Belmont de Villers? Inevitably 9 out of 10 will say integration. Yeah. And so that not only do you shop where you live, because public transportation was very different then, and cars weren't as plentiful as they are now, so you shopped conveniently in your neighborhood, but you also went to school in your neighborhood as well. And so when this opportunity to go to another school, when 80 years later, after
when John A. Gibson was a school.
When John A. Gibson was a school, yeah. And so this opportunity to go to the school that's in your neighborhood, then you're literally stopped at the door to say, no, you can't do that. But then you have this opportunity to do that, and so then your resources also go out of the neighborhood. So inevitably, some of those elders say, when I say, what do you think happened to the early Belmont de Villers? They say integration happened. And so then you stopped going to the dentist right there in school. You stopped going to the dentist right there in your neighborhood, the doctor right there in your neighborhood. You can go to any dentist, any doctor.
And I also think it was social neglect from the government, or I'm sorry, governmental neglect and crime. And we see that.
You're not servicing those areas anymore.
Right. You're not making sure they have street lights. You're not making sure their sidewalks are being kept up to date. And it's neglected over years because these people are neglected. The opportunities decrease. Those folks, besides the constant history of us always losing people, having to flee north for whatever reason, economic or otherwise, we see the community being left behind. As we progress, the community is being left behind. We see those of us who have means, now that they can, just like the people who can shop at those other stores, you see people, the doctors, the lawyers, no longer live in those neighborhoods. And it's interesting now because we call
So then you see the taxes, as you were talking about the services, you're seeing the taxes go to other neighborhoods, ad valorem taxes, or even sales taxes if you're having a business there.
Right,
Go to
right.
other neighborhoods.
And think about it. What happens when the money leaves? And we see that now when they're talking about closing schools. The money left.
Yeah.
The taxes left. And now the kids who are just here are usually people who, might survive off government assistance or enter into a sort of lower middle class, and they don't have the tax dollars to maintain the school. As a result, the numbers drop and the school closes. We have to save ourselves.
So I do want to ask, where do we go from here? But it's just that the money, I always say, don't bust a student, bust the money. So that, why do you have to, if that student is moved to a different school, money is still being provided in that school. And so if you have this, you have the whole school, then
I'll let the educators, because I don't know much how that all works. So now, years from now, I'll tell you what happened when it becomes history.
We can research it.
Right. But right now, because we're still in it, I just have to listen to what everybody says.
And I do think it's, as we close this segment down, I do think it's a case for revisiting integration. And perhaps a better title is examining integration. So how do you then look at it? And in 25 years, what will our children or those who are researching or archiving this history say about what we did today? And if that was truly then a benefit for our children, what the impact will be.
That's up to us.
Yeah.
Will they look back and then will they wonder, just like we wonder, what were those people thinking? Sometimes I wonder, what were they doing? We had all this wonderful neighborhood, we had all this, and they just left it. But then I started to understand how they were tricked out, forced out, pushed out. The neighborhood was economically depressed. I understand the other things that happened at play and understand what the resistance was and what it was not. I personally think sometimes, like right now, I'm more in my phase of Booker T. Washington's ideals, even though I came up under a very much Du Bois philosophy. Right now, we have to go back to listen to what Dr. Washington was saying.
And I think they were the same. I think
Really?
they were,
I see that in a lot of ways.
I think they had perhaps different roles, but they were all going towards that same full equality and full benefits of the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
No, definitely that.
Just
Definitely that.
take a different road, whether it's this industrial education or this intellectual education or liberal arts education, whichever road you take,
And then
it's all
sometimes I want to
necessary.
be like Marcus Garvey and just say, forget it. Just forget this.
Well, and that's the beauty of it. It's on this earth, it's a lot of roads.
Right,
And as one of our local colleges say, a road will get you there. And so in 1 minute, because we're going to, the program is almost over. It's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Where do we go from here?
I think we have to Sankofa. It is not taboo to fetch what was lost or what was forgotten. And what's the saying? It's not where you tripped, or it's not where you fell, but where you tripped. See the mistakes that we made, and we have it looks like now we are having a chance to do it over. So when people say what they would have done if they lived back then, we are now back then.
It's the opportunity.
And now you have the opportunity.
To revisit.
Right.
To revisit.
And one of the things I'm trying to do with getting so much done in my district at Howard T. Williams, while we still have African Americans in that neighborhood, to see how you can build and see how you can re-engage the government in such a way to where you are responsible for what you have and what you own, and where people can't just come in and put you out. Well, now the infrastructure is there. We're pouring millions upon millions into that district. At this point, if you sell your house, that's on you. That's all I can say.
Here's then a chance to not only revisit Black history, but to visit Black history.
Right.
So we're gonna take a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Ms. Celestine Lewis, who is Executive Director for the Jacqueline Harris Preparatory Academy, the sponsor of this program, and the incredible visionaire of this project. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. We're back live on WBQP TV 12 and 12.8. Thank you so much for joining us for this special show of revisiting Pensacola's Black history. And I'm so excited to be joined with Ms. Celestine Lewis, Executive Director of the Jacqueline Harris Preparatory Academy, with the vision to have this project. And thank you so much for including Teniade Broughton and me in it. So grateful that we're able to bring this. Why did you want to do this project?
I just felt a need that we hear so much about famous people, but here in Pensacola, we have people who just paved the way. And I wanted to learn more about these individuals. And I've just been so fascinated with Nick Williams and Dr. Polkinghorne, and even Dr. Good was he was my dentist when I was a kid. Can you believe this?
So we're revisiting history that you lived.
That I lived. Wow. And Mrs. Good, his wife, was my home economics teacher.
Wow.
So I am reliving, and a lot of those names that you have mentioned, I lived those individuals when I was a kid. I hear my mother and talk about them and going to the doctor, Dr. AIRY. I remember that up on North Hill. Yeah. So I just wanted to know more. And indeed, I have been blessed with your wealth of knowledge, you and Teniade. I just love what we have done. Yeah. And I think we have been really enriched by the knowledge that you all have shared.
Well, thank you. And we're not done yet. We'll have an after the show. We'll continue. But again, Ms. Celestine Lewis, thank you so much for your vision for this project. Again, on behalf of Teniade Broughton and myself, I'm so excited that we were able to be a part of it, to bring it. And it doesn't end here. We'll be live on WRNE 980 AM and 93.7 FM to have the last of this conversation. This has been a month-long project on this coming Thursday, February 27th at 7:30 a.m. Yawn, wow.
And thank you, Robin. Let me just say this.
We're going to be there.
Robin, let me say this. I think our media, WBQP and WRNE. And listeners, it is very important that we keep these two organizations in business. I mean that, because they are serving our community so well. And we are able to get our word out in the community. So may forever WBQP lives and WRNE. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thank y'all so much for joining us. We thank our studio audience. We thank our front row experts who will not leave, because we're going to do after the show. I don't know how we're going to do this. I'll talk to Vernon and Troy, and we'll figure out how to do this. But thank everybody so much for being a part of this project. We could not do it without you. And history, as she said, is so important, and we're all living history. We're able to talk about it because someone told us stories about it. And so during Black History Month and all year, we encourage you to share the stories of your history, your personal history, your business history, your family history, your community history, not only with those in your circle, but with everybody. Your story is important, and so that's why this is important. So again, on behalf of Teniade Broughton, Robin Richard, Ms. Celestine Lewis, thank you to WBQP TV for carrying this show live. And so we will end this segment, and then we can transition, and we'll ask some audience questions, because I want to come to City Council Jewel Canada Wynn with a ton of questions. With a ton of questions. So do we need to say good night, Troy, to everybody? Do we need to say good night? Good night.
Good night. Good night. Thank you for listening and watching.